Hey grade 11s, this is the last set of notes we're going to have on the immune system, and then we're going to be moving on to how the brain controls your body. So we'll finish this up today, and then you'll hand in your definitions and descriptions sheet, and then we will be done with the immune system. So immunity. We have two types of immunity. These are active immunity and passive. Active immunity is when the individual produces antibodies needed to stop an antigen, and passive immunity is when the individual is given the antibodies. So we'll look at active immunity a little bit more in depth. So again, this is when the body produces its own antibodies. This can happen through the process that we learned earlier, through our specific response. So we are developing those antibodies after getting sick, but we can also have vaccines which give us active immunity. So a vaccine is a virus that has been treated so that it is no longer able to work. They cannot reproduce themselves and infect the person, but still have the characteristics of that specific antigen. So a vaccine is kind of a dead form, if you want to think of it as a dead form of a virus that still shows the specific antigen for that virus. So the body then recognizes that antigen and goes through the process of creating B cells and T cells, but now so you have those, again, we talked about those memory B cells, memory T cells in our bodies floating around. So anytime that virus comes into contact with them, with that specific antigen, it doesn't take 5 to 7 days anymore to engage our specific immunity. It happens right away because we have those memory B cells and memory T cells for that specific antigen. So if we go back to our chickenpox reference, that's why if you get a chickenpox vaccine, you're not going to get the chickenpox. Well, it's very unlikely that you will, because your body already was exposed to a dead form of that virus that couldn't make you sick, and then your body produced the antibodies and has memory B cells and T cells to fight that off. So passive immunity is when an individual is given antibodies without having to go through the specific response system. So in passive immunity, because it's not your own cells that have developed to fight off an antigen, they do not reproduce, which means this type of immunity is only temporary. So for example, when babies are born, while they're inside of the mother, they're actually given antibodies through the placenta so they don't get sick as soon as they're exposed to our very germy world. But slowly those antibodies go away because the baby's not reproducing them. So babies also get some antibodies still from their mother through breast milk, which helps because, again, our world out here is much different from their world inside of the mother, and so they need some extra support for their immune system so they don't get sick. So moving on, we'll talk about allergies. So we know that our bodies are not perfect and sometimes they mess up. That's what happens when you're having an allergic reaction. So allergies are a hypersensitivity to everyday substances that normally would not cause an immune response. So basically, your body decides that something like pollen, which is not actually dangerous to our bodies, has to be removed. It's a toxic, dangerous substance. Okay? So if we look at hay fever, it's when an individual breathes in pollen and their non-specific immune system reacts to this antigen, right? So we've decided pollen is an antigen, even though it's not. But in this case, it's an antigen. Your non-specific immune system reacts to that antigen. And so we know that histamine and then mast cells as well make our capillary beds more permeable in that area. And so that leads to the swelling of tissues, right? Because more fluid can flow out into kind of that cell area. So this swelling leads to wheezing and coughing for many people, right? So we breathe in that pollen, so it goes into our lungs, and that's where our histamine starts to release or to cause the capillary bed to be more permeable. So there's swelling in kind of your lungs, trachea, so that sort of area gets swollen. Some people also get a runny nose and watery eyes, and again, it's because of this swelling that histamine is causing. Histamine is thinking, we have to make these cell walls more permeable. We need to get more white blood cells, more macrophages, more phagocytes into that area so we can get rid of these antigens, where in actuality it's just pollen. But yeah, so that's why sometimes people take an antihistamine drug to stop the histamine reaction from occurring if they know that they're going to be exposed to one of their allergies. So an antihistamine would work against or prohibit the histamine from making those cells so permeable. Anaphylaxis is the most extreme form of allergies. This is caused when there's such a drastic increase in histamine in the body that all of the blood vessels dilate so much that blood pressure drops dangerously low. So there's so much histamine, all of your body capillaries suddenly become super permeable. There's too much fluid leaving your vessels going into your cellular space, so it causes lots of swelling. You can notice it very heavily in the lungs and in the trachea. Someone who's going into anaphylactic shock will have a very hard time breathing. And epinephrine is the drug administered to help reverse the effects of anaphylactic shock. So that's kind of how we have immunity we talked about, and then we also talked about allergies. So those are kind of two interesting things to know. And then we have a system called the lymphatic system that's closely connected to our immune system. So the lymphatic system is made up of lymph vessels and lymph organs. It's a one-way system that only allows fluid to flow from the body back into the bloodstream. And it has three jobs. 1, our lymph vessels take excess fluid in the body and return it to the bloodstream. 2, absorbs fat from the digestive tract and takes them into the bloodstream. And 3, helps the immune system defend against disease. So we talked a little bit about the white blood cells, some of them being in different lymph nodes. We talked about B cells being in lymph organs and in the spleen. So we're going to get into that a little bit more right now. So inside of lymphatic vessels, we have a fluid called lymph. It's mostly water with some dissolved nutrients, electrolytes, and oxygen. And this fluid is created because the lymph vessels take up extra fluid from body cells so that it can be brought back into the bloodstream. So if we look at this little diagram down here, we can see all these lines are lymph vessels. So if we looked at this hand specifically, outside of the capillaries surrounding your cells, there's some fluid. The job of the lymph vessels is to take up some of that fluid and bring it back, and then it gets dumped into kind of the different areas of the heart, so that fluid can then join back into your bloodstream so your blood doesn't get too thick. Okay, so there are 2 ways that the lymph fluid joins back into the bloodstream. 1 is the thoracic duct, so lymph from the body below the thorax, the left arm, so that's talking about this kind of reddish tinged side. So again, from the body below the thorax, the left arm, and the left side of the head and neck, including the cisternae chili, or chili, which receives lymph from the digestive organs. So all of these areas, so this lower body, left arm, left side of the body pretty much, is emptying into the thoracic duct, okay? So that's how it's, we have our thoracic duct here, and that's going to enter the bloodstream through the left subclavian vein. So there's veins that are below your clavicle, hence subclavian. Your clavicle is your kind of neck bone, or your collarbone, pardon me. So your lymphatic fluid from the left side of your body and anywhere below your thorax enters through the thoracic duct into the left subclavian vein. So again, take a look at this diagram. You can see where all these different things, this is the cisternae chili, and it leads to the thoracic duct. And then, like I say, all of these different lymph areas come and they deposit into the left subclavian vein. And then if we look at the right subclavian duct, it's lymph from the right arm, the right side of the head and neck. So this kind of chunk of the body in blue here would enter through the right lymphatic duct into the right subclavian vein. So that was kind of a long-winded explanation. Take a good look at this diagram. It explains everything quite well, how the different areas, so they're broken down like this. You can see the different colors, which sides of the body and how they empty into either the left subclavian vein or the right subclavian vein. Okay, so take a look at that on your own. That was a very long-winded explanation. So lymphatic organs, because we talked about how there's lymph fluid, there's lymphatic vessels, and now there's lymphatic organs. There's a large number of lymphocytes are stored in lymphatic organs. hence lymphocytes, lymphatic organs. Anyways, the biggest lymphatic organs are the red bone marrow and the thymus. So the red bone marrow, in adults, this is only found in bones of the core body, so like the skull, ribs, clavicle, etc., and this is where B cells mature. The thymus gland is located between the trachea and the sternum, and this is where the T cells mature. There are other organs that would be considered lymph organs as well. I just want you to know that B cells mature in the red bone marrow and that T cells mature in the thymus. But other organs could include the spleen, like we talked about before, and many lymph nodes. Lymph nodes are in charge of cleaning the lymph. They often swell when the body is fighting an infection. So your white blood cells are flowing through your lymph nodes as well. They get cleaned in those lymph nodes, and they often swell when you're fighting an infection because there's a buildup of white blood cells. So you might be able to feel your lymph nodes when you're sick. There's some in your neck. So if you've ever felt like really bulky, kind of almost blocks in your neck when you're sick, that's your lymph nodes swelling. So if you want to take a look, there's a video here that summarizes the lymphatic system. It's pretty good, so I recommend you take a look at that. Again, the big takeaways from this: the T cells mature in the thymus, B cells mature in the red bone marrow. Looking at this to figure out where the thoracic duct and the right subclavian duct empty into, and then the three jobs of our lymphatic system. Right? So that summarizes everything you need to know about the immune system.